All right.
All right. Thank you, Natalie, so much for coming here. I'm really looking forward to. I've read about Human's Diary on the Medium blog, and also something you've shared at work. Ever since I was like, I need to get like, I don't know, I want to be part of it. But even listening to the story is a great way to get there. So let me first start with introducing Natalie. Natalie Kuhn is a senior manager of service design at Capital One and leads the enterprise risk service design team. She has been at Risk Services Design Team. She has been at Capital One for over 4 years. Prior to her role within ESR, she led various initiatives within the commercial bank across treasury management, One Experience, B2B payments, TM operations, and credit. Natalie regularly teaches design education courses as well as coaches teams through research, synthesis strategy, creative concepting, prototyping, and product testing. Before Capital One, Natalie worked as a service design consultant at Fjord and has spent career as a designer working with startups, agencies, and providers to strategically improve their offerings. Natalie is also a Service Design Network accredited service design master and co-founder of the SDN New York chapter, and they host monthly events open to anyone. And I have to say, I've attended them, and they're wonderful. I'm really excited. Natalie, you could, take some time out, carve some time out, and share the experience about Human's Diary. I'm not going to talk much because you're going to give us the intro anyway. I'm just really excited that you're here, and let's get started.
Sure. Thank you. Now that everyone knows my entire life story, thank you so much for the introduction. I'll jump into a passion project of mine. I do have a few screens to share, but I wanted to do more of an introduction of where did this come from. Really, it started within March of last year, right as I would say the pandemic was hitting America. And for me, I was just looking for any sort of connection. I think a lot of us had felt the shock of being really our worlds flipped upside down and being all of our ties with our community, with the face-to-face interaction that we had with human beings was immediately cut. I think somebody from the Human's Diary had described like you have all these ties and strings to the outside world, and then immediately it feels like it's cut a little bit. And then of course we got into Zoom, and now this is the way that we interact with humans very often. But it was really a project that was started from two designers out of the Milan, Italy, and two people that I had known that I just really admired as designers. And it was a very casual yet fascinating project that they had begun together. So I'll give a little bit more of an introduction with some screens here. Um, we love a presentation. But yeah, Human's Diary. This is the logo, the branding from the group, and really these are the folks that were involved in it. From Miriam to Chiara, they were really the two founders of this thing, and I'm a little bit ambiguous in describing it, really because it was just bringing together 5 strangers on Sundays for an hour and a half, keeping it to that time, a half an hour really to like warm up and get comfortable talking to complete strangers from different parts of the world, and then an hour to really start connecting and talking about what they were experiencing. There was no prompt. I think Chiara used to talk about it as a pointless conversation, more to drop any sort of stress around what was the output or what had to come out of the session. It was like, just don't even introduce anything about your role. That was what was funny. I was smiling during the introduction. Now you know a lot about me. But in these calls, we would just jump in and say, I'm Natalie, and I'm in New York City in America, and today this is what I'm noticing. And it was really a diary throughout a lot of the beginnings of the pandemic. It went from, I mentioned March, until fall of 2020. So it was an extensive amount of time in which we were bringing together people from different parts of the world to exchange their thoughts, their feelings, the ways that their local government or their federal government, I guess it's not federal everywhere, but their different government structures were managing the pandemic or lack of ability to manage the pandemic. And so I got involved first as a participant, and then I started coordinating across and bringing more and more participants in from the US. So it had primarily been within Europe, different parts of Latin America. It was really within Mariam and Chiara's network. And then with the addition of myself and bringing in participants, we started to blend those different countries with America, which was really interesting to hear from more of a spectrum of different places. And then when it comes to Sylvia, she had come in as more of a futurist advisor when it came to a workshop that we eventually ran, where we really solidified some of the themes across the individuals and talked about how could we create some kind of a probe or an artifact to represent what we thought would be coming out of the pandemic. I think, and a lot of us in being designers and watching a lot of the trends, maybe there was initially research and looking at themes, and then coming out of the themes, like, what does that mean for the future? And I think we're still having that conversation, which is interesting. But these were essentially the main core collaborators. And when it comes to the participants, this is the picture of the different individuals who came to the sessions, only, again, 4 to 5 people at a time. So it was very small calls. And then we did have a workshop with 20 individuals where we looked at the themes across all. But yeah, just 3 or 4 of these people had never met before, would get on a Zoom call and just really talk. It was very open-ended. And coming out of each of the sessions, we would write a chapter of this diary, and it was really a consolidation of the themes from that particular conversation. So we haven't gone back and done really assess how the diary shifted over the months. We did boil up what are the main themes across everything. But I think what was really fascinating about the different chapters was initially a lot of the conversation was very, I want to say flat. Like it was like, I'm alone now. I am in my home. There are less people. Like it was very, and then as people had more time to think, they had more of how they felt about that, or more about how that was impacting their work life, their personal life, their family life. So it was interesting that initially a lot of the chapters felt a little bit more observational. And then as we got into the middle of last year, and then as we started to get into the fall, it was a lot more articulated in a reflection, in a meaning, or even assigning meaning to what was going on. So the maturity of the conversation shifted quite a bit and evolved as we were meeting with different people. And a lot of the people shared their feedback from it is they had a more open conversation with strangers than they did with friends or family, because there was no judgment, there was no expectation, there was nothing that they knew about the other people except for what country they were from going into the call, so that there wasn't this expectation of I have to be a certain way, or I have to present myself in a certain way. We didn't even, like I said earlier, we didn't talk about job titles or anything. So there wasn't a hierarchy of somebody being more senior, experienced, or whatnot from another. It was really just exchanging thoughts. Anything else to say about the participants? Yeah, just quite a range of folks looking at, I had a list in my head of the different countries. What's standing out to me now is Chile, I think we had Berlin, Milan, Chicago, New York City, trying to think of what else. There are a lot of different countries. You can check out each chapter from Human's Diary, lists out the different countries that were on the call, and as well as the themes that were discussed throughout that session. And that's all documented. I can share it just at Human's Diary for both Medium and Instagram. I could do a quick switch over to that. But each chapter, you can see it explains kind of a paraphrasing of what the project was, and then it goes into the detail of the individuals and where they were located in the world. So you can see each one of those here. And then you can also see within the Human's Diary Instagram, you can take a look not only at, if I scroll, hopefully you don't get whiplash from this, not only the participants, but also some of the quotes from the sessions and kind of the way that shifted throughout time. So I highly recommend, I can share that at the end as well. If you take a look and see what some of the folks were saying, I'm going to go into more of the themes than the specific quotes that were shared. And then this is what I'm going to share in just a moment, some of the themes coming out of all of the chapters and what we were thinking that meant. So that's that portion. But yeah, so just a few different collaborators, core collaborators running the sessions each week, and then complete strangers who would join. And then, of course, I'll transition into this section. Of course, being that we're all designers and strategists and researchers, we wanted to make sense of what we were hearing. So we came up with different themes that reflected upon the entire I guess we had 11 different sessions over several weeks. And so I'm going to walk you through some of the themes, and some of the themes that are written in questions, something to think about. And so this is really around physical intimacy and being separated from human beings. We've experienced this new way of being separated physically. And of course, we have this new connection with Zoom, and now you can reach anyone in the world. But what is the difference from that and seeing someone in person? I'm sure a lot of us have had that reflection of what it feels like to mostly be looking at the screen, and all of a sudden the Zoom cuts out and you realize I'm in a space by myself, possibly, or maybe you have family and things happening all behind you, and it's just very different from the way that we were living prior to the pandemic. So navigating through these extremes of looking for these physical connections with people outside of our household, but then we need to compromise, obviously, for our safety at the time when we were in the midst of the pandemic. So yeah, this one was just around what if in 2035 intimacy is only a memory, and what if this was how we lived for the rest of until 2035? And already I think these themes, you can tell they were ponderings before we started reopening in different places. And so it was really like of the moment of like, what if I never get to see people outside of my household again? Like that's, oh my gosh. Or what if what if we have multiple pandemics and that just becomes, so they're all questions to think. It's not necessarily, it's based on what kept coming up. What if schools are not based on spaces? So looking at education and a lot of the home schooling that's been happening. Again, now that we've been doing some reopening, some of this, it's like, well, we probably have some kind of a mix. There's a lot around that to think about, but learning through digital interfaces, and even the idea of circular learning, like learning things as you need it versus a curriculum, those type of things. So that was another theme about education. We had a theme about what if intimacy and closeness are regulated by the law? So where does the local or governments at large, where do they play in allowing or disallowing certain interactions? Like what if that was more built into a law versus something that we were more in control of as individuals? So what if that was all regulated? And then what if social proximity becomes the new luxury? Like what if that's some kind of VIP experience that you get to have, or how would you, clarify if some people get to see one another? I think we saw a lot of scenarios throughout the pandemic where it seemed like there were maybe some luxuries in there versus could not see one another given different scenarios. And then finally this to me was interesting, particularly from an American lens, of what if a spectrum of truths becomes the new foundation for society? To me, we already live in a spectrum of truths, especially with the variety of different things you can find on the internet, just this overload of data and information. It's really, I feel like we are living in a spectrum of truths, but this came from a lot of the conversation around what do we believe, what do we not believe, what are we being told through the media, what is the government saying, what are scientists saying? It feels like it's changing every other day. We don't have like one message. It's like just like all this different information, and we then as individuals are trying to make sense of what we are hearing from different sources and trying to figure out what's best for ourselves, our family, our friends, those who we care about. So that was another theme. And then this element of what if mental disorders are more widespread and accepted? So because of the impact of the pandemic, there was a lot more, at least from the conversations that we had, a lot more checking in, or a lot more like we felt this, and this was through a lot of the Humans Diary conversation, more of an openness to talk about real struggles in relationship to the pandemic. Of course, people are always dealing with different struggles, and whether it impacts them from a mental perspective, leading to depression, anxiety, any of those things. I mean, that's always been the world. Like, we're always facing some kind of struggle as individuals, but this pandemic really put it out in front. Like, well, we all know that there's at least one thing that we have in common around this pandemic, and we can talk about how it's impacting us mentally. So this came up a lot about how folks were feeling from more of an emotional or mental perspective, given where they were in the world and how they were experiencing the pandemic. So ultimately, from these themes, we had this workshop across 20 people, and we basically had them get into teams and discuss what a prop or what a artifact of 2035 would be to represent where we were headed as a society given the pandemic. So here were some different examples. Maybe these are movies that you've seen, or things you're familiar with, but it was basically looking at how could you create something, whether it's an object, whether it's a story, whether it's a song, a WhatsApp conversation, like what could be a thing from 2035, given what we know as of today with the pandemic. So not talking about reopening necessarily, just like what we're feeling today, like what could this future world look like, and what would be an artifact coming from that. So we had people think more individually. We had them come up with different lenses, whether we're looking at nature, whether we're looking at the physical structures, whether we're looking at government. We had all these different ways that you could process what you were experiencing, what the themes were, what your group was thinking. And then we built out different scenarios amongst the groups in which they really came up with a story of what they thought the world would be like, in taking any one of the lenses of the different themes that I walked through. They picked one that they thought resonated most with what they could see happening in 2035, and then ran with that and came up with different artifacts. So with that said, what I want to do, I didn't give you all of the artifacts. I mean, I could go like one by one through each one, and that might be even interesting to you. So what I will say is that if you go to, I think it's this one, and I can just have it open in the background in case we want to reference it, or if you're like, I want to know every artifact. But this was the session, this Humans Diary Designing Futures session 1, where there are pictures, or I could just jump to that really quick so you have a sense of what was in there. There are pictures of different things that were created, like what are your balance report of the different activities you're doing, looking at keeping these circles that we have everywhere. What does that mean? This one, let's see. Well, I won't go through all these because I said I wouldn't. I want to pause for questions, and then I want to do an activity with you all individually, and then we can have some small group discussion as well. Do a check on how many folks we have at this point. But let me just stop sharing and just open it up for any questions about anything I may have missed, or anything you want to know more about when it comes to the Humans Diary project.
Yeah, I had a question, Natalie.
Sure.
How did you and the group come up with these conversation starters?
The themes I just went through?
Yes.
That was from reflecting on all of the chapters from the conversations that had come up in the Sunday session. So to reiterate, every Sunday we met with 3, like depending on, there were usually 2 of us that joined that were organizers. And then we had 3 to 4 complete strangers join the call, and they basically talked through their experiences, and we wrote a chapter about what they talked about. And so we looked at all, we had 10 different chapters that we reviewed, and the prompts, the conversation starters, as you were calling them, or the themes came from those 10 hour-and-a-half sessions and what kept coming up from people's conversations. Does that help answer, or was that still, it seems disconnected?
Yeah, so what you were saying was you facilitated the different sessions, and the questions were actually things that came up. Thank you.
Sure, yeah.
I have a question, Natalie. While I was listening to it, I was just thinking about, you did say like you picked random people, but was this, uh, but do you think that you were able to capture like different demographics because, it has affected like, men versus women versus single versus people with kids. So I'm just curious, like, did you feel like you got the good mix of all?
No, I don't think that. I think if we were doing a real research project and it wasn't like some side of desk, let's see what happens, and they were all people that were connected to any one of us, and a lot of them were other designers. So it was people within our network. So that's a really good call out, Anita, to mention it. This doesn't represent a full, like when you talk about male female, that actually was the only well, we had two requirements. One was that we have, as best as we can, get like close to 50-50 male female. So we did look at gender, and then we did try to pick different cities. So those were the only two lenses. But ultimately, since it was from our personal networks, there are going to be biases in that. And we are of a similar age, we're of a similar demographic when you look at financial status, education, working in design. So there were a lot of things that made what we identified as themes specific to a certain demographic. So although it was geographically, there was a variety in the geography, loosely the gender. I think it could have, if we were like really going for it, like complete strangers that were out of our networks, I think we would have found something different. We just didn't take it that far, but that's a good call out.
How did you come up with 2035, year 2035?
That was from Sylvia. So her being a futurist, and I don't have a background in that. So if somebody else on the call is experienced in this, she had recommended it being not like 5 years from now because that's too close. But if you pick like 2050, it's too hard to imagine. So the 15-year gap was something that was recommended from her background of studying futurism for people to try to imagine, because it's far enough out, but it's not too soon. So that's, if she ever watches this recording, she'll probably love my explanation, but that seemed.
Yeah, no, that's interesting actually. I usually people like always think like in 5, 10, multiples of 5, but 20, like more than that is pretty interesting. No, the themes are amazing. Did you see that while you were having these conversations, uh, were the themes evolving, or were you asking like questions that were like something that you were capturing from the first set of conversations, or they were like always consistent with the same
They
format?
were not always consistent, as I kind of talked about the evolution of the depth of conversation and the projection of the future. I mean, if you think of your own circles, and obviously we have all different circles, and I think first, like the quarantine in 2 weeks, and so it's like, what is this really going to change for 2 weeks? And it was like, well, maybe it'll be like a month, and it's like, what is this? And then it's like, the more you get into it, the more you start thinking about, we could be in this for, and now it's getting closer to a year. Like, this could have impacts that are long lasting, that change us as individuals, as societies. And when I say change us, I don't necessarily mean positive or negative, but like, this is a substantial historical event. And something else that was interesting when you were speaking that I thought of is that you often don't see the impact of something until it's passed. Many years later. And so that came up in one of the conversations also, is we can reflect as much as we want during the pandemic, but it's a little bit hard to say how it will be, how it has impacted us. We're too close to it, I think, and also too hopeful. But it's too hopeful sounds, I don't know, but basically, we're just on the brink of maybe a little bit more normalcy. Maybe we can be safer and feeling comfortable in conditions that we used to feel very comfortable and safe in. So I think this idea of impact and long-term, and it's shifted throughout the pandemic. At first, this is not anything, this isn't going to impact us at all. In the middle, like, maybe this could, and I feel like now on the other side, it's like, stop talking about the pandemic. Let's just get through this,
Yeah.
depending on who you are. So it's been interesting.
Cool. Wow. Thank you.
Any other questions before I can go into a little bit more about the artifacts if you're interested, and or I do want to have some time for just some reflection, and I'll talk about what that is, and even have you all exchange some thoughts, maybe in like 2 or 3 people per small breakout room if you're open to it. But any other questions? Or thoughts? You could have another comment about, lack of diversity across our group here in the Human's Diary.
Well, my comment was, and it may not have come up in the groups, maybe it did because they were aware, is where does 2035 fit into some of these global initiatives like climate change? And, again, I think, even an awareness that there's something that's going to be done by 2025, 35, 50, could affect your expectations. And I would tend to think this, but I'm just curious whether or not, exploring that. I don't know.
Yeah, we didn't. It's interesting that you mentioned that. I'm trying to think back, and now I feel like I should have reread every chapter to remind myself, since it has been a few months since we talked about this last. I don't recall anything. I feel like sustainability, there was something that came up there. We didn't really talk as much about global initiatives or even by country initiatives outside of how the countries were handling the pandemic. Like in my town, this is how you don't wear a mask, or you do wear a mask, or you have to leave. That was in Italy in particular. They had to have, and maybe everyone knows this by now, but it was new to me back then. Like you had to have a document that allowed you to go a certain mileage outside of the vicinity of your home. And if you didn't have that document, you could be arrested. And there was a lot of like variety in the extremes of how it was being handled. But anyway, to answer your question in a shorter fashion, the larger sustainability and country initiatives didn't come up as much. It was much more like my town and community, and this is what I'm seeing. And I have some sense from like my other local communities, but like what's happening over there in Chicago, what the heck? Like it was very much personal, I think, than looking at the grand scheme.
Natalie, I think we have a question in the chat.
Oh yes.
So Vibha wants to know, how does the group foresee the diary's impact in the short term, and is there any plan to share it in sociological academic contexts?
I would love to continue the project. I think full transparency, the individuals who started it, with myself, I think I'm guilty of this as well, tend to invest in several side of desk or outside of work initiatives. The first two, Miriam and Chiara, are both co-founders of Service Design Drinks Milan and organizers, as well as they work on a project side of desk called Transforming Designers, which is really focused on the evolution of the design discipline as a whole. Actually really cool. You should check out transformingdesigners.com, and they have insights with that, which is a whole other research project. So I think ultimately this project came at a time when we were looking for even more than we were currently committed to. And I think now that we've just gone through, I keep using evolution, but like we've gone through a lot in the last year that I think, I won't speak for the others, but I think for myself, I've been trying to take a step back from additional projects and side things, just to kind of like regroup from what we've seen on a variety of different levels in the last year, and kind of just like take a moment to be quiet and reflect. So in terms of the short term, we don't have plans to this is actually the first talk that is being done about Human's Diary. Let me just check. Yeah, we have not done any talks about it. So lucky you all. You can, thank Anita for having the first time Human's Diary share out. But no, we haven't done any sharing. We haven't looked at any sociological academic contexts. I think it would be wonderful to think about also the implication, or maybe not implication, but the power of talking to strangers from different parts of the world and having this common tie to one thing. Like, I mean, I think anytime you look across countries, we're obviously going to have different lenses from a geographical perspective, but this was something that gave us a little bit of empathy. Like, we all know what the pandemic is. And I think when you look at different issues that different countries are facing, we start to lose touch and lose the empathy across. So I think that's something that was a little bit unique about the pandemic, was just how, although it affected us all differently, we all knew what the pandemic was and how it could possibly be impacting. So great question. I would love to do more, but this is a one-off so far.
Cool.
Anything else?
Yeah, I think that's all.
Okay, well, I'll do one. I'm just looking at time. I think we should still be good if I just go through, and you can, if you want to look at this again, it's just Humans Diary at Medium, and you can kind of see some of the dome life. I feel like some of this is here to stay, or at least with New York City, you can see a lot of the outdoor living, but this was like, what if we just, everyone is in a bubble all the time? I guess that was one of the groups, and they had put notes in here, and I won't go through every single note, but they reflected on what they were discussing within each of their groups. This was around the circular education of like learning things as they become, I see the chat, I'll go over there in just a moment, but like going into like learning something as it becomes relevant to you versus the curriculums that we have today. And then, oh, here's us celebrating at the end. So this was, yeah, that was all from the workshop, but yeah, I want to run a brief activity. Let's see. All right, chat is all good. So what I wanted to do for folks, and this is something that I would probably just suggest or inquire about for you all as individuals outside of this session, is think about how and when do you make time and space to reflect on what you've personally experienced over the last year, regardless of like whether it was specific to the pandemic or going beyond that, when we think about the really like this reckoning around racism, systemic racism, like a lot of the other topics that came out through the pandemic, and just thinking about when and how you make time to process that, and or just give yourself space. And I would say it's probably a good idea to make that space if you're not already doing that right now. But what I wanted to do was to give us all, I'm going to say 5 minutes, so until 7:10, to just quietly, whether you have paper or not, I'm not super picky about that, but to just take 5 minutes we can turn our cameras off unless you want to stare at each other. I feel like it's, if you want to have personal reflection, maybe cameras off is more comfortable, but just take 5 minutes and to write down a few things, and I'm leaving it pretty open-ended. Just think about what happened the last year and how it made you feel, and what you hope to take away from the last year or so, and what you hope to leave behind. We're not going to share this out loud. I just wanted to give 5 minutes for you all to reflect for a minute, and then we'll have a conversation out loud, but you don't have to talk about anything that you personally reflected on. So it's 7:06 right now, according to my time and my clock. So let's go until 7:11 or so, but just have a few minutes of quiet to kind of reflect personally. We're not going to share out loud, but just write down or think quietly. And I'm going to turn off my camera so I'm not watching you. But yeah, we'll do that for a few minutes. All right, I'm also going to drop the two spaces that we had kept all of our chapter notes and the Instagram, in case you're curious about the detail of some of the themes, and if you're interested in looking at like the timestamp of what was I experiencing at this time and what were those folks talking about. If that's interesting to you, there are a couple resources that I just dropped into the chat. But yeah, I don't want to share out loud necessarily what you were thinking about, but I guess, and now I'm realizing, since you all are regulars, you all somewhat know each other. So it's not, I was thinking of, could we do a mini humans diary where we choose to talk maybe about the opening or your experience within your local area, and what's been happening with reopening. I mean, Anita, are all of you, you're all in the same town essentially? You're all within Northern Virginia?
Some of us are. I don't think everyone.
Oh, okay. We could do an update of where.
It's hard to say because sometimes we have had people join from Tokyo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so.
I mean, I guess, and maybe it'll be more of like a mock, quick conversation, just so you get a feel for what the sessions were like within Humans Diary. But essentially, I can go first. I would just say, hi, my name's Natalie, and I'm in New York City. It's 7:12 p.m. right now. And today I've been thinking a lot about how excited I am to be able to see friends again, but how also strange, or like feels like you're doing something wrong, not knowing when to bring the mask in some settings or when to. For example, our building, I live in a high rise in New York City, recently said no mask if you have been vaccinated. And they took down all the signs about wearing a mask or don't share the elevator and those things. And so it's been interesting to see the transition of switching the signs. Instead of masks 6 feet, it's like, well, mask if you're not vaccinated. And it's a lot more relaxed here. And I guess there were fireworks last week because we did reach 70% vaccination rate. So that makes people feel a lot more comfortable, and the cases continue to go down. Our governor posts a chart where it shows a curve of infections, and it's been interesting to watch that curve across time. And that's another activity I wanted to do as a designer. Having a framework is always exciting. So could we use that curve that our governor created as a way that you could pinpoint what was happening in your life during what point of the curve, if you're living in the New York City area, and what that meant for you? Because I could definitely look at that curve and have a sense of everything that was happening during that time. So yeah, for me, reopening is happening, and now everyone has those mask chains that they wear that like hook them, or they have them on their elbow. It's been interesting to see what people do with the mask if it's not mandatory everywhere, like how they, you still get the chin guard, or I saw somebody they put on their forehead. So I guess I'm curious how does anybody else want to share how they're experiencing reopening in their location?
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura. Nice to meet you all. Actually, Natalie, I think one of the points that you touched on about, not being sure when to put on your mask when you're meeting up with friends, that's one of the things that I'm experiencing right now. I'm really excited with reopening because, there's museums opening, and especially since we live in the DC area, that's such a big part of, I guess, our culture. But your friend can be vaccinated, but there's still that anxiety of, well, what if they get infected with this variant that is that you can get reinfected, and it's hard. There's so much anxiety. I think a lot of us share that. And then one of the topics that you were mentioning earlier on about the human diaries, about how do you like in 2035, how is the pandemic going to change? Like what sort of luxuries are there going to be? And I was just thinking like, how are we going to make friends, or how are we going to make friends after the pandemic, especially, with the current friends, you have some sort of level of trust, and you can figure out, how responsible were they during the pandemic? Are they careful or do they keep good hygiene? But with new people, especially if you move states or countries or whatever it may be, you don't really have that level of foundation. So I really like the human diaries topics that you were talking to us about, and I definitely share a lot of the same sentiments.
Yeah, the personal health values was what we identified as when you mentioned hygiene, is what are each individual's personal health values, and noticing that it's all very different. And having had friends that well, I definitely don't take the subway, but then I won't go in there, or then the waiter came by, this was a long time ago, and we would wear masks pretty much all the time, and that she was like, I can't believe he made us put our mask on when he came to the table. And I'm like, well, you won't take the subway, but then came to the table, you refused to put on the mask because it like ruined the ambiance. And we were outdoor eating, so I mean, anybody on this call could be like, yeah, that was weird, or that was mean, he's a server, like give him respect and wear your mask. So it's like everyone has different values, and it's all very like based on their own positionality in the world. Anybody
yes,
else?
Definitely.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. But anybody else want to share about either reopening or a reflection on just what happened in the past? Yes, go for it, Randy.
One of the experiences I found real interesting was going to church here in DC. So recently I was kind of like the last group that got the vaccination, and that was an experience, going to your first vaccination, and the line went all the way out the building and blah blah blah. And then I came back for the second one, and it's like either people didn't want their second one, or everyone got it earlier somewhere else, because I just pretty much walked right in and they were pretty much giving it away. But then you had been waiting forever for this, or at least it felt like. And but going to church this past weekend, I've gone 2 weekends in a row, and I'm Catholic, so the bishop actually just announced that in the Catholic Church, we say dispensation, where they basically give you a break from doing some act which is required or supposedly required, like going to church, special holidays, etc. And so the bishop removed dispensation for not going to church, I think as of next weekend, the following, but which should be interesting. We'll see if more people show up. But it's really funny when the first week I brought my mask and I wore it. I pretty much, took it off to take the host. And then when we got outside, kind of took it off and actually had conversation with strangers, which was interesting. But then, it's interesting seeing families where certain people in the family have masks and certain don't. And, again, 3 months ago, you would have been giving people the evil eye. Now you're like, come just, okay, well, it's a choice, and you're probably, but it's, we're kind of coming down to the calm now. But again, it was kind of a very personal, and, very, taking it all in, I guess, kind of experience.
Yeah, it's every day is a new journey. I have so much that I could, like, you could get a thread. I see a couple raised hands, so we'll go to them, but you've noticed, like, I'm like, oh, I have something to say to that and that. We have a lot of commonalities. Is it Vibha, or how do you pronounce your name?
Oh, yeah, it is. Hi.
Hi, feel free to share.
Thank you. Well, I was about to kind of carry on what Laura mentioned earlier and your response. I realized that we all, I think, learned a new level of empathy. In some way, the COVID situation, the experience of everybody having been through that pandemic globally, made us all, feel as if it was a big equalizer. It sort of brought everybody, whether it was a celebrity or a politician or even the queen, down to the people who are the hardest hit, and everybody was potentially a victim. Everybody seems to have suffered some losses. So in some way, we have a heightened sense of empathy for everybody, simply because we went through all of it together. And on the other extreme, I do feel that we have somewhat a lower tolerance for people, which is very strange too. And that thought was triggered by your mention about the server at the table, because when you are expecting others to follow the same hygiene practices and the health practices commonly. Anybody who doesn't, you kind of, mentally tick them off, thinking, how can I not, take this as seriously? So I don't know. I'd like, you to comment, somebody else, whether they also found this dichotomy, and do you think it's going to continue, or what could be the factors which would potentially change those?
Sonia, do you have something related to that, or do you have new topics?
No, I totally have something related to that. So my background is I'm a healthcare provider. So I came to UX in 2019 and got trained and got my certificate and everything. And then crazy COVID happened. So I'm right there with her about the idea of, my biases. Like I'm sitting there thinking about this mask can save someone's life. Why are these people not wearing this? And so I'm just going to own it, and just say, I've worked for years in worksite wellness. I've done vaccines. I've gone around to people and asked them if they wanted to participate in screenings that we do for employers. And, here's all these wonderful things available to people for free that can save people's lives. And why are they not taking these things up? So, I mean, I think it did create some sense of like personal awareness too, with all of this. But at the end of the day, I'm just really concerned about the little bit of social time that we've all had with each other and how we're all craving it, and trying to get us back to that 6 hours a day of social time that's recommended by Gallup and some of the people that did like the original well-being book. So I think I've been thinking the same way. So I'm glad somebody else brought that up, but it definitely gave me some sense of bias. And then also I think a greater sense of purpose. Like, when we think about healthcare, a lot of times we think of the workers that were there to help people, during the times when they may have been on the ventilators or these other kinds of things, and then the vaccines themselves. But, we've all got something that we can do to help with the people who are on the fence about getting a vaccine, or the new variants that are coming out, and that continued empathy and realizing that we have a part to play, but how do we do it in a way that motivates people?
There's so much, like every person that has something to add, like there's so much more we could say about this. I want to be careful of time, but I think a couple things that stood out to me around the continued empathy. I think even as we come out of this, and I think we touched on this a little bit earlier of who is comfortable with what, like we have to ease back into this amount of socialization. And so whether it's like, are people starting to eat indoors, and like we talked earlier, Randy, about like talking to strangers without masks, like how do you gauge, especially if you don't know the person, like what should, like I do a lot of mirroring, I guess, like if someone has, and I kind of shifted out of this in my building because they said the masks were now for if you've been vaccinated, but now as I say that, I'm like, should I be wearing a mask? Like I still am like, somebody tell me what to do. I just don't want to do the wrong thing and spread something or make people uncomfortable. But I've been fully vaccinated. But yeah, just this continued empathy of where are your friends and family and their journey of coming out of the pandemic, or given the different area that they're in, maybe they're not coming out of it. I speak from being in New York City. And so like, how do you help one another through this other side? And this other side, it's like, we're a global group, and not every country, like you look at other countries and it's not over, it's far from over, and looking at the different strengths. So that's something to, but the continued empathy, I hope we can hold on to. There was more there, and also healthcare workers, I can only imagine, I mean, PTSD and a lot of the struggles and the departures from healthcare because of some of the things that they saw. And I don't think we talk enough about the experience that healthcare workers have had throughout this time. I mean, I remember clapping every single day, thanking them. And now it's like, but it's like this would be one of the more difficult times, because as everyone's getting excited, to me, I don't know, but like as everyone's getting excited to reopen, there are people that have experienced things, again, all across the spectrum, people on this call experience things that have they fully been able to process? What do they need to help process or to move past? Not even move past, but just like make sense of what they just experienced. Anita, you turned on your video. I didn't know if you were going to say something.
No, I was just agreeing because I realized it was off and I was nodding my head.
No.
No, this is great. I mean, I wanted to share too, but I wanted to hear what others had. I started writing, and the things that would come to me is like how grateful I am. Because when it started, it was more of a panic, and then the whole racism, it made me so emotional because I'm someone who, came to United States for my master's, and so I actually had similar experience, and I was just taken back to that moment where I also felt it, and then looking and reading the news, it was very emotional. So I was just listing the things that's happened. And I don't know if it's an overwhelming that we are about to open, but I still have these like being grateful. I'm hopeful. At some point I was like, oh wow, this has done so much good to the nature, right? Like people have been indoors, and we live in a neighborhood which has like a natural lake, and I've seen like all the birds, and I haven't seen all these animals in the last 2 years that we moved in. And now they're all out there, and I personally am an introvert, so I suddenly became a lot more confident behind the Zoom calls, and I've been able to, even though a single person, I was able to do a lot more events this year compared to last year. And of course, got connected with all the friends I've lost touch from school and colleges, because they all all over the world, and it was amazing reconnecting with the family. So but also want to be empathetic. I agree with Vibha when she said, we are more empathetic now. It has done a levelizing effect all through. But also, sometimes for me, a lot more positive experience of the pandemic. So I'm very careful and sensitive to other people who've like lost lives. So I'm like thinking a lot more. There's a lot more, actually, that's why I think I'm kind of conscious, like going back, been so used to going and hugging friends at work. Now it's like you can't do that anymore. And then, not everyone has had the same experience. So you can't be saying like, oh, I enjoyed my pandemic, spending time with my family. So there's a lot more thinking than, before acting. So it's a mixed, I don't know if I'm happy about the opening or, I'm not able to put my finger on what expression it is, but it's mostly like, it's like a background reel with all these words coming together. I haven't thought about it. I know that we'll probably have to go back in September, but yeah, lot of things. And I think those 5 minutes were pretty powerful.
Yeah, I know we're close to that 1 minute, but I guess my takeaway is, and I am trying to personally take my own advice, is to make time for yourself, or even like yourself and a friend, or like you and your family, whatever makes sense for you, to reflect a little bit more and think about what you need to process, or again, like what are you grateful for, or what do you hope that we take moving forward? How do you find a lot of people have been talking about reprioritizing their life around different things that are more, they realize were more important to them. I think about that for myself in particular, and looking at just current events, and there was a lot that I didn't have lived experience in, and now I really can't go back to not being aware of certain things. And so I think that just make the time for yourself and your community, whether that's one other or a couple other people, to talk. And if, that's my takeaway. Just find a way, or it doesn't have to be talking. Maybe it's just quiet journaling or something, but just to make time.
I like that, Natalie, what you said, reprioritizing. I think that's something, everybody's trying to do that, but they're not saying it loud, but reprioritizing what you want to do. Yeah.
Reassess and allow yourself to reassess. I don't feel like you have to go back to whatever was before, because that's gone.
Yes.
Not going back. We're going forward.
Yes.
So I thank you all for joining this evening. I'm happy to connect. I know I just connected with Sonia on LinkedIn, or I saw the note. I'll connect with you. Maybe someone else did too. But feel free to connect with me. Feel free to check out the Instagram and the Medium if you want to learn more about Human's Diary. I'd love to talk about this more. First and only talk about it so far, but thank you all for listening and sticking around for this time. And I just wish you the best of luck on the opening and processing and whatever you need during this time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. This was really, really, it was really nice. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Have a good evening, guys.
Bye.